Well, thank you. I've been given the green light to go ahead. So my name is Matthew. I'm really delighted to be here. This has actually been two of the most intellectually stimulating days I've had in a very long time. So thank you very much for all of you, the previous speakers. I've really enjoyed this. I get to speak to you today a little bit about rebalancing in the age of the digital economy. Now, rebalancing is a new term to me. After my first engagements with Gavin, I normally think about this in terms of redistribution rather than rebalancing. But that's kind of how I'm going to apply that term here. I'm going to give a little bit of an optimistic story about how the digital economy, how AI, how new technologies are going to help with some of our intergenerational, and certainly within generational, and possibly even between countries inequalities. And then I'm going to go to my actual research, which is a bit more pessimistic. This is not my normal area. I'm not an intergenerational inequality expert. I'm a climate finance guy, so I'm a little bit out of my depth, but let's see how this goes. The first thing we have to figure out is rebalancing what? That hasn't quite been very clear to me. So we've talked a lot about the possibility of rebalancing income and wealth, but then the question is between whom? Are we thinking about just between generations or within generations? And might we want to think a little bit about rebalancing between countries? And I think we do. We could be thinking about, is it actually the income and the wealth? Are those the things that matter to us? Or is it the opportunity and the outcomes? And that's what ought to be balanced. One of the things that we find in the data, in fact, I think Paul mentioned it, is that lower income households often don't want to just be handed out cash. They want the chance to do well on their own. And so perhaps opportunity is one of the things that ought to be rebalanced. If it's not that, maybe it's power. We don't live in economies, we live in political economies. Our economic models, if they don't accept the political realities, are pretty much useless. And so one of the things we have to think about is how do we balance power? And so what I'm wondering is, have we got that right? Do our lobbyists, do our big firms have too little power, too much power, just the right amount? Have we actually optimized this? Do we genuinely have the best democracy that money can buy? The final thing we might want to think about rebalancing is on taxation. So you can't come to the IFS and give a talk and not mention that. And that's actually the core of the research that I'll show in the second half of this talk. Do the rich pay enough? Do you pay enough? I'm always delighted when Paul makes that point, that if you line up Britons from the one who pays the least tax to the one who pays the most tax, the group that pays less tax now than at any point since the Second World War is the group from the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile. It's the middle 50% of Britain that pays less tax now as a share of their income than any other group. What that tells me is that the middle 50% of Britain or our politicians think that the middle 50% of Britain thinks that this country is not really worth paying for. And as long as the people and the politicians think that's the case, they're probably right. Fine. So we've spoken a little bit about what we might want to rebalance. Now let's think about who does the rebalancing. And I can think of a few different actors in our political economy that might want to do this or might be a part of this. We can think about individuals, households, and families, rebalancing within generations, across generations within the household. Maybe markets, businesses, financial markets might have a role to play here. Might be civil society, NGOs, charities. The ones we've been speaking about today have a major role to play. Or it could be governments. And there are lots of different ways that these different actors might do it. So families will save now in order to bequeath to their children a little bit more income or a little bit more wealth. I'm interested in the financial services bit. Financial services enable markets to help with rebalancing and redistribution in a huge way. Education and philanthropy, I highlighted those in green specifically for Gavin, because that's what we've been speaking about today. That's what they're doing. But most of my work, I work in a policy institute. So mostly I work with governments, and I think about how governments might be involved in rebalancing opportunities, rebalancing wealth, whether that's privately owned wealth to the individual or publicly owned wealth, assets for society that all of us can get on board, public infrastructure. So those are the ones in purple are the ones that I'm mostly going to be trying to speak about today. Those are the agents that I think ought to be involved in rebalancing, and these are the mechanisms through which I think they ought to do it. And the thing that's changed, the thing that's new, at least it feels new to me, is that the new infrastructure is increasingly digital. Right? And digital public infrastructure, I think, has the potential to really radically unlock opportunities, especially for those at the lower end of the income scale, especially in middle and lower income countries. I think that's a tremendously useful catalyst. So my favorite example of this comes from India. And we'll talk a lot about India's investments in digital public infrastructure. But basically what I'm talking about are the shared digital systems that any app, public or private, can plug into. Right? No use having a mobile phone on Mars. You've got to have a network to plug it into, right? These are essentially, when I think of digital public infrastructure, I'm basically thinking about the roads, but for the digital economy. Something that's going to play the role of energy systems or water and sewage systems, these public infrastructure assets that really matter to us, but for the digital economy. And there's a whole different component, there's a whole different set of assets that are part of this. One of them is simply just straight up interoperability standards. It would be infuriating if every single plug had a different shape, right? We would not be able to have this conference. All those cameras, all these computers need to be plugged in. We couldn't do it. So interoperability standards, both in the physical technologies, the shape of the plugs, but also in the digital platforms. We have to enable digital technology, digital platforms, digital goods and services to speak to one another. We need to have good broadband and 5G connectivity. That is a huge public good. Digital identities enable people to shift out of the informal economy into the formal economy because we have a digitally confirmed, biometrically secure identity for the individual. It's cheap to provide. You don't need to go through a huge, long process with a passport office. It makes a huge difference for banking the previously unbanked. Public data, we spoke about that in the earlier talk. The value of data, any individual data point is pretty much nil. The value of multiple data points, aggregated, well cleaned, easily accessible, can be absolutely transformational. Instantaneousness of payments makes a big difference to transactions, to the ability of agents to operate in the economy. And we can reduce transaction fees in lots of different ways, including with immediate payments. And key and central to all of this is building the trust between the provider of these services and infrastructure and the users. That's absolutely central to all of it. And the prime example of this anywhere in the world happens to be in India. It is called the UPI, the Unified Payments Interface, developed by the Bank of India and a consortium of private banks. It's a not-for-profit public company that created a series of technological innovations for India. The first is called the Jam Trinity. My Hindi is embarrassingly poor, but basically Jandan, Aadhaar, and mobile. Mobile is Hindi for mobile. What this does, so Jandan is your bank account. Identity is Aadhaar, so you get a digital identity, and you've got your mobile number. The Jan Trinity connects all three of these things so that every individual can have a digital identity tied to their bank account through their mobile phone. That's all you need. That ties into an identity-enabled payment system. It allows biometrically backed, secure payments. And it's an instantaneous payment service. You make a transaction now, it shows up in the other party's bank instantly. That has radically reduced the potential opportunity for corruption in India. It's got a bill payment system, so your water bill, your council tax bill, phone bill, all of that can be paid directly through this system. Really simplifies. All of those businesses and utilities don't have to send out as much mailed bills. You don't have to wait for people to receive the bill, write a check, send it back in. All instantaneous, much, much faster, much more efficient economy. There is even a national electronic poll collection that's part of this system. I am fairly certain that when I get home tonight, I will have a ticket because I drove under the wrong tunnel to get here. And I have my car registered with some of the TfL things, but maybe not with this particular tunnel. If I were in India, I wouldn't have to worry about it. This digital infrastructure transforms the ability of the state to operate. India, we know, middle income, it's the world's largest democracy, sure, but it's had an awful lot of corruption. It's had a lot of political turmoil. This digital public infrastructure has enabled financial inclusion, bringing the unbanked into the formal economy. One of the key things that that does is it unlocks real potential for tax administration. Your roadside chaiwala selling you tea in a little clay cup is now part of this system, which means that that transaction is also part of the tax system. This expands the tax base. If you're interested in intergenerational rebalancing, you must also be interested in the design of the tax system and the ability of the government to collect revenues. Now we can collect revenues from far more transactions. Competition. The fact that this is all open digital public infrastructure means that we're not locked into a monopoly of an individual firm. What India has cracked that Europe and the United States has not is that we do not want to be under the monopolistic control of Elon Musk. If you want to operate a drone program in Ukraine today, you do it by logging into Starlink. Right? That's monopolistic power. India, through this system, has radically transformed the ability of everybody to join in and the ability of the government to prevent rentier capitalism and monopolistic manipulation. It's a really important element. Welfare delivery, the actual payment, the process of getting the money out of the central bank, out of the treasury, and into the hands of poor people. Because of this system, it's now direct. There's no leaky bucket from the Treasury to the Department of Work and Pensions, to then the state government, to then the State Department of Work and Pensions, with all of those snouts that used to be in the trough completely ripped out. We instead go direct from the Treasury to the individual's account. So we've cut out so many opportunities for people to skim off the top. The lower transaction costs throughout the economy, are potentially a very big contributor to productivity. And the fact that all this transactional data is now available means that we can do research. We can learn things about the world, about the economy, about who's acting in it and how. And we can actually use that in order to improve governance. Now, so that's what it's doing for the state. What it's doing for individuals is basically the gateway into the formal economy. Previously unbanked people in India weren't saving in bank accounts. They were saving in gold. Right? The matriarch of the family would have some gold. It would be hidden underneath the cooker. It would be handed to the children on their wedding day. But the fact that they can now save cash, they can save money, not cash, money, means that they can start to accumulate wealth. Which means that it's not just an issue of rebalancing from rich people to poor people. It's an issue of empowering poor people to accumulate assets of their own. That's hugely important. I think it speaks to Paul's point. We don't just want handouts. We want the ability to do well on our own. It enables credit markets. That leads to investments in all sorts of different elements of the household, investments in education, but it also helps with consumption smoothing. If you have a flood, if you have a drought, if you have an agricultural shock, we can access credit markets now. Hundreds of millions of people can do this who previously could not. Opens up opportunities for insurance. Once you've built up your credit history through UPI, because you've got all of that history of all of those transactions, you're now better able to access the credit markets, but you can also now start to access insurance markets as well. That leads to increased resilience for the individual households and the reduction in corruption. I'll show you the actual figures, but basically we've closed off the leaks in that leaky bucket, and the benefit transfers actually go to the people who are meant to receive them. How big is it? Well, we've got 500 million users. 65 million merchants are actually using it and accepting payments. It accounts for about 80% by value of retail payments in India. And we're talking $350 billion a month of transactions. It's a big deal. Other countries, Singapore, I think it's Vietnam, and a few others, are now starting to mirror this. They want to build their own. UPI is now also used for international remittances. It's plugging into the global financial system as well. How does it affect corruption? Well, it's expanded the tax base. The roadside chaiwala is now part of the formal economy. They're not selling you that tea outside the tax system anymore. It's been really good at busting ghosts. I thought I should have a movie signal on this. Tiny rural village in India used to pay, a village of 1,500 people used to pay 300 teachers. There were not 300 teachers in a village of 1,500 people. Right? There were 300 registrations for people to receive wages as teachers in a school that doesn't even exist. We have thousands of these instances all across the country. Fake recipients of benefits and of public sector wages. It's eliminated speed money. Bureaucracy is slow, especially in India. And one of the biggest sources of bribery was just, look, can you, Mr. Public Official, please just expedite this planning permission? I need it. All this sort of stuff can be dealt with much, much faster. We've essentially eliminated this speed money problems we have in India. And I've spoken about cutting out the middlemen. How big is this? Well, since it opened, around $600 billion has been sent directly to beneficiary bank accounts. That's just in sort of welfare payments and public sector wages and things. And around 45 billion has been saved by identifying those ghost recipients. Ghosts don't have fingerprints. UPI requires a fingerprint, so we can cut out that 45 billion. And that's all a rolling thing, it's counting. So that's my story on why I think digital public infrastructure and the AI economy can actually be really very useful. It can enable households to start engaging in the real economy, in the formal economy, and they can do it in a way that is seen by the tax system and that enables them to accumulate assets of their own. That's important. Now for the pessimistic bit. Who here thinks that AI is going to increase growth in the economy? Here, show of hands. It's going to increase growth in the economy. Almost half. Do the other half think it's going to slow growth in the economy or have no effect?
Depends how you measure it.
Okay, sure. Depends how you measure it. I'm not sure what it's going to do to the size of the economy, but I've got some thoughts on what it might do to the size of tax revenues. Those should be very closely correlated, but I think there's an issue. Before we get into why I think this is an issue, I just want to remind everybody how important state capacity really is. This is a term I'm using from Tim Besley. State capacity is essentially the ability of the government to levy taxes and collect them. It's hugely important to the welfare state. And if you think the welfare state is going to have any contribution to intergenerational rebalancing, say through supporting education or supporting health or building new housing or hypothecating taxes in order to hand cash transfers to the poor, or to provide the universal basic capital. If you think the welfare state's going to have a role in that, then it's going to have some way of collecting the revenue, and that's the tax system. Poor countries don't tax. Poor countries collect around 10 to 20% of their GDP in tax revenue. Rich countries do tax. Rich countries tax 35 to 45% of their GDP. That's what the government gets their hands on. You get a couple of Gulf countries, things are different. Right? But that really does matter. The issue is the way that we deliver and design our tax system. I think AI is going to have an effect on the tax system for this simple mechanical reason. We tax labor at a high rate, and we tax capital at a low rate. Across the OECD, the average effective tax rate on labor is about 35%, and the average effective tax rate on capital, robots, algorithms, this sort of stuff, 19, 20%. Now, if AI shifts the relative source of new value creation away from high tax labor towards low tax algorithms and bots, then purely mechanistically, by definition, we have a reduction in tax revenue. And I think that's what we're going to see. And I've been playing around with some of the numbers, broad brush OECD averages, about a 5% shift in value added away from high tax labor towards low tax capital gives you about a 1% reduction in total tax revenue, okay? Or tended to, it's a constant relationship. AI created this for me. I think this is a potentially really significant issue. A loss of 1% of your tax revenue. If you're interested in intergenerational rebalancing, that's going to be an issue. And that's only for a 5% shift. I think we might see a bigger shift than that. But it's not just the income side, right? The fiscal triangle is tax, borrow, and spend. So if the tax side falls, that's problematic. But what happens on the spending side as well? If what we see is not just we shrink labor income tax, but we also see aging populations, rising inequality, and a whole load of people left unemployed or employed at much lower rates, we're going to start to see rising pressures on the public purse. Somebody is going to have to compensate those who are left unemployed by AI. We've also spoken a little bit, actually quite a bit, about the concentration of wealth within individuals and within individual companies. And when we look at the structure of the AI economy, it is basically 3 companies produce the chips and 7 to 10 companies use them. Right? If the value created by this economy is booked as profits in just 3 countries. The other 197 countries are going to struggle. What we see internationally is that we already have a major concern of base erosion and profit shifting. Is that a term that's familiar? Yeah, to some. So basically, around 36% of global corporate profits are shifted to tax havens. That's around 4 to 10% of the total corporate income tax, or the total corporate income. That's a much bigger impact in poor countries. They're losing tax revenues equal to about 1.6% of their GDP. Rich countries are losing tax revenues of about 0.5% of their GDP. But 3 times the problem for the poor as it is for the rich. I think AI can accelerate that. I think it's not doing it just yet. I think it's a future risk, but I don't know how far away the future is. There's another issue here. We don't just live in economies, we live in political economies. And the way governments operate is on a constant returns to scale basis, at best. Right? More employees at HMRC doesn't give us an increasing return. We basically just get the return per employee. But the AI economy, these big tech firms, the structure is very, very different. They are, by definition, increasing returns to scale industries. Right? The first telephone is worth nothing. No one to call, no one to call you. You've only got one. You need at least 2. But if you've got 3 or 4 or 50 million, they're a lot more valuable. It's the network effect and that agglomeration. That's where we get the increasing returns to scale. And the challenge is that anything that's increasing returns to scale will accelerate and grow far faster than something that's constant returns to scale. And when our governments are stuck on a linear growth, but individual companies and individual people are not, we have a rebalancing of the power between people and government and between businesses and government. The White House apparently only costs $250 million. That's the donation from Musk to Trump. And he has free reign of the White House. Right? You can buy the government of the biggest economy on planet for just $250 million. So that's a huge asymmetry, but I think there are 3 more asymmetries that AI is going to deliver. One of them is around information, one of them is around geography, and the other is around power. The informational asymmetry is basically HMRC has very little chance of understanding where big tech is actually generating value and how. Is it from the data? Is it from the use of that data? Is it from the user interfaces that they're putting on their products? It's going to be extremely difficult to identify taxable events. There's a huge asymmetry of information. Now, Jim Merlis was the one who got the prize for his work on asymmetric information tax system design. I wish very much that I could ask him these questions now. I don't know what he would say. But that informational asymmetry is going to be a challenge. There's an asymmetry of geography. This is the base erosion profit shifting. We get data that's sourced all over the world, users all over the world, but we have just a small number of companies that actually own the countries that actually have the companies in them. And that means that we have the potential shifting of value creation or the tax incidence of value creation towards just a small number of countries or companies. I would, if you asked me 5 or 10 years or even 5 years ago, will we ever have a globally coordinated tax regime that's going to help combat base erosion and profit shifting, basically shifting profits to tax havens? I would have said not a chance in hell. No way. Won't happen. We will never get 150 countries to sign up to a global system to ensure that large companies pay at least a particular amount of tax. And I would have been dead wrong because that's exactly what we have under the OECD Pillar 2 reforms. All companies with revenues of over 750 million euros a year must pay a minimum 15% corporate income tax. Now, it doesn't matter where they pay that, but on their global operations, it must be a 15% tax. Yeah. If you don't want to put the tax in your island, Caymania has not signed up for this. If you don't want to put the tax there, that's fine. Your company can be headquartered there, but they will pay that tax somewhere else. Any government is able to claim it. Any government in which the company has operations is able to claim it, up to a 15% tax. I didn't think that was going to happen. It did happen. 2025 was the year it started to be implemented. Also when we got Trump back, and the momentum's slipping quite considerably. And the third asymmetry is in power. How much power do the lobbyists have? What's the relative strength of the state versus companies? And I think that all three of these are going to really mess up our political economy. So what are we going to do about it? Well, we've had a presentation that we should transfer share ownership of these big tech firms to the people who generate the data. That's one option. I think more simply, I think we should tax. And I think that there are three ways we could think about taxing AI. The challenge when you're doing tax system design is always an issue of sort of, what's the phrase? How do you pluck a goose in a way that causes the minimum possible hissing? That's what you're trying to do when you design a tax system. You don't want to stymie the possibility that new industries are going to transform the economy. You don't want to cut out the possibility that AI does genuinely add value and add growth, that these UPI programs like we have in India can transform lives. You don't want to cut that out and you don't want to disincentivize that. So it's difficult to tax it. But there are a few different places where I think we could tax. One is taxing compute, the chips, the hardware. I think that's pretty easy to do because we know where it is. We could tax that at the point of production. There's only 3 companies in the world that can do it. One is in the United States, one's in the Netherlands, the other's in Taiwan. Easily identifiable at the point of production. We could put a massive tax on chip production. But then you've got this issue of, well, that's maybe going to slow down AI development. Okay. We could tax it not at the point of production, we could tax it at the point of deployment. If you tax at the point of production, 3 countries get a lot of tax revenue. Everybody else gets screwed. If you tax at the point of deployment, you tax these chips in the data centers where they are deployed in all the countries where you have data centers, then far more countries get in on this. Right? So that's more distributive. But you might end up with, especially across Europe, issues of, well, I'm going to locate my data center in the country that's going to give me the lower tax, not in the country that's going to face the higher tax. So you can get some distortions there as well. But it's doable. We know where the data centers are. They show up, they light up on a map because they use so much energy. So we can find them. That's not hard. Another place we might want to tax is the externalities. Told you I'm a climate guy. I'm an environmental guy. That's my field. Data centers are energy intensive. There's a lot of carbon emissions. They're also water intensive. There's a lot of water use. They create noise. They're big, big projects. They create noise. There's a local noise pollution issue. They consume so much energy that they change local energy prices. So if you live near a data center, your energy bill goes up because they are throwing in so much demand into the market that is driving up prices. All of these are externalities. Economists have a way of dealing with this, thanks to Art Pigou. We just tax the externalities at their social value. We have tools for this already. We have precedent for it. We know how to do it. It's observable. I think that's a good way forward. The other place we could do things, we could tax data. We could tax bits and bytes, and we could tax the flows of data across borders, across the actual data centers. I think in principle it could be done. No, I think in theory it could be done. I think in practice it would be devilishly difficult to actually get access to monitor the number of bits being transferred. So those are the places that we might want to tax. Here's the asymmetries that I think taxing in those different places might have an impact. So the expertise in information asymmetry. We've got the compute power. Whoops. The compute is observable, it's quantifiable, it's excludable. That's good for taxing. And the color coding here basically means how hard is it going to be to implement. Compute, we don't really have to deal with the profit shifting, but the revenues are concentrated in just one country. So you get this concentration issue. On the data flows, the informational requirements are going to be really high. Most tax systems are not going to be able to deal with that. On the political power, it's going to face really high lobbying resistance and its coordination intensity. You would have to have every country signed up on this. And I think that's unlikely. So I think really the dark blue, the easiest option is to go for the environmental taxes, the sustainability taxes. Now that might seem like a cheap shot because the environmental guy comes in and says the solution is environmental taxes, but I think it could really work. Now, you might push back and say environmental taxes are tiny. In the UK, they're about 0.7% of total tax revenue. That is tiny, but so is inheritance tax, 0.7% of total tax revenue. So I think we've got a really strong economic efficiency a la Pagoo argument. We've got precedent. We know how to do it. It could expand. So I think that's mostly what I wanted to say. This is work in progress. It's under review at the moment. I'm looking to you for pushback, things I haven't thought about, ways to improve that paper, get it to a better journal. So in my view, the future of rebalancing is going to be digital. It's going to depend on our public infrastructure, state capacity, and political economy. So that's my talk. Thank you.
Great. Do we have any questions?
Thanks, Matthew. That was really interesting. Thank you. I'd really like to ask a question about UPI and a question about
Sure.
the rest of it. Not the UPI. Maybe. The relevance of this is that when you talk about the global environment, actually getting anything going, whether you're talking about intergenerational rebalancing, starting up capital accounts, incentivized learning, whether you're talking about stock data and creativity, it all looks for a system which will work globally and is going to be reliable, so it's not subject to corruption and any sort of distortion or anything like that. Clearly, the Indians have actually managed to find a route through that with UPI. So my question is, to what extent, how practical would it be to get that UPI system working globally? Do we actually need to get people like the United Nations behind it, or basically do you think it's something which, we're going to have a conversation with the Indian government and see what we do?
There's a whole list of countries that are trying to roll this out. I don't have the list of countries to hand. It's at least half a dozen, possibly a dozen. I should have the names, the list ready for you. But what was interesting to me is that it includes low and middle income countries, but also Singapore, right? There is there is appetite for this in some parts of the globe. Apple won't love it. Verizon in the United States, one of the big mobile companies, won't love it. Places that already have a digital infrastructure, but it's not public, have vested interests in making sure that you lot are on my platform, not someone else's. India didn't have this. They created a public platform. There was no one who lost, not many who lost. And there were many who gained. If you already have a digital infrastructure and it's private or quasi-private, there's vested interests who aren't going to want a public. I can't make apps for the App Store. An app that's made on the App Store for Apple can't necessarily work on Samsung. You have to create a different app, right? We've already, in some parts of the world, closed off those options. And now we're going to have to undo that.
Well, thank you very much. I look forward to having conversations offline with you about that. Moving to the second issue, you know, I'm pretty passionate about disintermediation. I've talked about it from this morning. There is an automatic assumption in your assessment of taxing AI that actually centralizing everything, putting it through the public pot has got to be, has got to be the end result, because that's the way everybody works. Now, I mean, the thing is it not a good thing to actually put other sectors to a test to actually make them become more efficient? In other words, by, not just compensating the reduction in tax that they're going to get as a result of AI, but actually saying, you've actually got to find ways of operating without running up debt, which is 100% of your GDP levels. And, I mean, the levels of debt are just colossal at the moment. And they, it's the one Achilles heel when it comes to government, essentially, that you run up such huge public debt. So, I mean, shouldn't we actually use the opportunity in order to actually say, come on, let's try and think of another way of doing this, which is, more efficient, provides, less loads of public services.
Greater efficiency in public services and public service delivery, absolutely. I'm all for it. I would never argue against it. Everybody claims, well, what I'm going to do is increase the efficiency of the NHS, or increase the efficiency of the Department for Education, or increase the Department of Work and Pensions, all these sorts of things. When you vote for me, I'll improve the efficiency. We've had a number of governments, a number of prime ministers, a number of possibly even too high a number of all of these things in the past 10 years. They've all said this is what they're going to do. Not one of them really seems to have made a whole lot of change. I'd love the public service delivery to be more efficient, but you tax and you do intergenerational rebalancing with the economy you have, not the one you wish you had, right? You do it with the public services that you have, not the ones you wish you had. Whether we have really efficient public services or really inefficient public services, we still have this tax gap, which is purely mechanistic from the fact that we tax capital at a lower rate.